I think we're on air now. There we
There
go.
we are.
You see me? All right, there we are. So I'm Brian Frost, and I am a copywriter at an ocean here in Huntington Beach, which you guys might be able to see. My view isn't too bad here, and we're also here with Dr. Paul Zak, on your right there. A world-renowned neuroeconomist and founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomics Studies in Claremont. And what he's done is kind of combine neuroscience and economics like nobody has before. So we're really lucky to have a chance to talk to him and talk about some of the research he's done with a molecule and a neurotransmitter called oxytocin, which has been known for trust, love, human bonds, connection, things like this. And he's even been called a vampire economist, if I'm right, Paul.
So what kind of economist?
Vampire economist, yes, right? Isn't that what they call you?
Oh, that's true. I'd like to take blood from people, and we can talk about why that's the case. Thank you for that kind introduction.
So, as marketers, we're consistently looking for ways to create the most effective communication for our clients and how to connect with them deeply and create better, more emotional work. And for decades, the best way to do this was, at least the best way we knew how, was to ask consumers, in focus groups, do you like this product? Do you like this ad? Do you like this piece of story or communication? But we kind of started to wonder whether or not that was maybe the wrong question to be asking, and whether or not we should be asking this person's conscious mind, or whether or not we should actually ask their physiology and their unconscious mind. And so we started looking into this this idea that maybe consciousness is just the tip of the brand iceberg, so to speak. And so we began to an Ocean began to work with Paul a few months ago now on trying to measure this connection, or measure this unconscious emotional response to storytelling and to marketing. And what we're discovering is that we as consumers, all of us, we don't necessarily know what we like, which might sound a little weird or not true, but one of the studies we've done recently, we took the top 10 Super Bowl commercials from this last year, USA Today, and what we found was that this idea that people tell the world one thing, or they rate a commercial, but what happened was we tested all these spots, and what we found was what people said they like and what they actually physiologically show a response to are two completely different things. And Paul, can you talk a little bit about the results of those and what the correlation is between this self-report and what's happening below the surface?
Yeah, actually, before we do that, pull off the slide for a second, Brian, if you would, and let's just kind of go through a little background so people watching kind of get the idea. For the first shot is there's a really interesting neuroscience that has shown that what we say we like and what our brains like are different things. So if I put you in a study, can we get video back, Sam? Is that possible? There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. If we are in a study and I put you in a focus group and I say, hey, do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla? You'll say I like chocolate, and I'll say why. So, well, it has this nice flavor and vanilla's too. So give me some reason, but there's really no reason to think that something like liking is, the rationale for that is open to your conscious awareness. Right? Liking is actually a process that involves many brain structures, integration of information across those structures. It involves memories, things like smells that are very primitive when it comes to things like food. And so there's a good neuroscience reason to think that it's very difficult in many circumstances to have people articulate why they like what they like. So as you said, Brian, we began testing that in my lab about 5 years ago, looking at public service ads. And I think many of the people who are working in this area of consumer neuroscience, sometimes called neuromarketing, although it's a term I don't care for, have focused on attentional responses. So I can, bring up some products and have you look at it, and it turns out that basically anything novel in your environment will produce an attentional response. So that would be, in an example, an EEG or fMRI study, activity in the front part of the brain that controls attention. You could measure that in an increase in heart rate, for example. Fine. And so the sort of first level of consumer neuroscience is, hey, people get a 3% bigger response in their medial prefrontal cortex when they see this phone than when they see this other phone. And so this attentional response is not surprising, easy to look at differences in it, and those differences really don't predict liking, and particularly liking outside the product experience or ad. That's what I really want to know is, if I show you an ad, tell you a story, give you an interaction with some kind of product, does that lead to purchasing behavior beyond the period of that ad? So we began studying this in earnest, as I said, about 5 years ago, and recently have been working very hard with the U.S. federal government, particularly the Department of Defense, to help them craft more persuasive messages so they can, for example, convince populations where the U.S. military is active to say, help us find the bad guys so we can take them out of your village. Okay, so that's the kind of background. So the question is, where's that liking come from? How do I know from a neurologic perspective where that liking comes from? And it comes from what we found from a commercial perspective, that is marketing commercials, from areas in the brain that are associated with emotional resonance. So when I like something, I have this emotional response. So if I can imagine, Brian and I can both tell you it's quite warm today in Southern California, and a nice chocolate ice cream would be wonderful today, walking along the beach outside Brian's window. And so if I were to simulate that experience in my head, gosh, it's hot, I wish I had a chocolate ice cream, it would be great, I can imagine actually consuming that chocolate ice cream. Or if I see an ad for chocolate ice cream, that will induce my brain to have that simulation internally that produces the sense of liking. So where does that emotional resonance come from? What we found is that for ads with social content, a big part of that is a neurotransmitter that Brian mentioned earlier called oxytocin. So we've been studying this molecule for about a dozen years, and we've identified many of its properties, particularly when it's released with a social stimulus, with a sense of empathy, again, a sort of emotional resonance, which is a key part of liking. So if I see Brian using his iPhone, and for whatever reason, because the story is compelling, I think, hey, I want to be a Brian, and Brians apparently have iPhones, then I'm generating a sense of liking for that iPhone because I'm connecting to Brian emotionally. So I think that's the key point for marketers, is that I've got to generate a narrative structure, a story that engages me with the people using the product, and then I'll engage emotionally with the product. And that's what Brian and the folks at Innocean have called brand love, right? So oxytocin is sometimes called the molecule of love because it's released when we have sex, when we give birth, when we care for our offspring, when we see people we like. When we have any positive social interaction, our brain makes oxytocin and motivates us to interact with those individuals. And so the work we've been doing shows the same thing. When I have a narrative, some marketing material in which I have emotional resonance for the people, that carries over often to the product. So now, if we can jump to the test of that, sorry to be so long-winded, but Brian, you set me up so beautifully I couldn't stop. So now when we go to the Super Bowl ad studies, we took the readers, around 5,000 readers of USA Today, who ranked the 2014 Super Bowl ads, and we hooked people up to sensors that measured heart rate, activity of the vagus nerve, this nerve that's full of oxytocin receptors, skin conductance, And we've built algorithms in our work with the U.S. government that allows us to identify attention to an ad as well as the effect of oxytocin release, this liking response. And so we ran 16 people 3 days after the Super Bowl in the United States. This is, the most watched program of the year in the U.S. And we collected about 0.5 terabyte of data for 16 people. And then we used the algorithms we developed to rank which ads people's brains were tickled most by. And what we found was an absolutely zero correlation between what USA Today readers said they liked and what was engaging emotionally for the brain. So we developed this measure called ZEST. The ZEST of an ad is an engagement score. We call it the exact engagement statistic. And so ZEST gives you a quantitative and linear measure of how much you like an advertisement. So if we look at this list, we see that USA Today readers said they liked the Budweiser Puppy Love commercial. #1. It's my favorite commercial. It's got a puppy. It's got a Clydesdale. It's Budweiser beer. How can I not love that commercial? But in fact, it was towards the bottom third when it came to its ZEST ranking. Why is that? That's because that commercial, Budweiser commercial, does not have a strong narrative structure. In the first 5 seconds of the ad, you know what's going to happen, you get what's going to go on, and we see that the ZEST score over time begins to just decline. Okay, I got it. Puppy. Clydesdale. Right? It's cute. I understand that. Well, if you ask people, say, what do you like? Well, I like cute. How can I like puppies and Clydesdales? Of course I'm going to say I like that. That's not what the brain really liked. Right? So what we found was that the Doritos Cowboy Kid commercial, which has a good brother, a bad brother, the mother offers them Doritos, the bad brother pushes the good brother down, they're playing cowboys, and the good brother sort of hog-ties the bad brother. There's a narrative arc there. There's archetypes who are good and evil. There are the good brother is smaller, he's weaker, he has to overcome his ability to take on the bad brother who's meaner and stronger, and he eventually gets the Doritos. So that's a classic story arc that is very engaging both attentionally and emotionally. So we found the same thing as we looked at these other ads, that having this rich story arc, developing characters, leads to this bleed-over effect in which, because I resonate emotionally with the good boy, the little boy who got the Doritos, when I resonate with that, I also want to purchase Doritos because that's apparently what the good people eat.
So would you say it's fair to say that there's like a story button in the brain, quite literally?
Yeah, I mean, we are storytelling creatures. That's how we learn. That's how we transmit information. That's how we remember things. And we cannot get away from story. So to the extent that the story is compelling, both from a sort of action perspective, like a hot open, and it has sufficient character development where I develop this emotional resonance, I'm likely to get this bleed-over effect where now I have essentially brand love for this product. So the neuroscience here is actually very useful, and I can explain it in 60 seconds. Attention is a very scarce resource in your brain. It takes a lot of energy to intentionally focus on something. Like I'm focusing now, Brian, on your beautiful haircut. Right? So I'm going to focus on that for like 3 seconds, and then, thank you, then my attention is going to wander just a little bit. Why? Because that's the way our brains are set up, because there might be something valuable in my environment, or scary, I should do that. So we scan. So what do we do in stories is we develop tension. As the tension goes up, you sustain my attention to the story. So I need tension to get attention. And when I have attention and then I develop this character, so I have emotional resonance, then I have a completely developed story. And those are the kind of ads that work very well. So we should say, just as an example, you guys for the Super Bowl developed a really wonderful ad for Hyundai cars. I call it Safety Dad. What do you guys call this, that commercial?
I'm not entirely sure what the name of it. I think Dad's 6 cents, I think, might it be?
Yeah,
something like that.
That's right. There's this commercial that many people saw in which the father, as the boy's growing up, the father's constantly saving him from getting hurt by some flying object, whatever, and then he's taking out his 15-year-old boy for the driving lesson, and the boy spaces out looking at a cute girl, and now the car automatically applies the brakes. And so there was a real story arc there. There's a hot open. You see a little child who's about to get injured, and the father stops it. So now you got my attention. And now there's a bunch of other things that are happening. He keeps almost getting injured. Now he's growing. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. What is this story about? I want the boy to survive. He could die. Something could happen. And then, oh, the car saved him. So I feel like, oh, as a parent, do I not need this car that can save my child's life? Because let me tell you, I have a teenager. She spaces out all the time. I, of course, and you, Brian, never space out ever when we're driving, but my dear teenage daughter all the time. So, I mean, I think it was a really brilliant ad, and in fact, it scored very well in terms of the Zest score. I think it was the second or third best. So, you know, I think it really requires this blending of art and science. We're certainly not arguing that the neuroscience that we're doing can replace all the hard work, the creative work of developing ads, writing copy, filming, editing. No, that certainly is not going to happen. But the effects are much stronger when you can actually use, I think, the neuroscience to guide what you're doing and then use it as a test bed. So the graph here shows the rankings from USA Today and the rankings from the Zest score. And you can see pretty clearly that they're more or less unrelated to each other. So these are on slightly different scales. We've actually rescaled them so they look like they're on the same scale. But you can see that these are, you know, almost unrelated. And again, because I think marketers have reached this corner in which they're so dependent on, you know, conscious feedback, focus groups, test marketing, something that is not open to conscious awareness. I mean, if you force people to say something, they're going to say something, but it's not really predictive. And so I think, you know, this is a great example of how using, you know, developing technologies and our deepening understanding of how the brain works can actually make marketing more effective, more efficient. You can test bed it faster before you release it, and have greater impact from a buying perspective.
So maybe it's worth asking. A lot of marketers use the phrase brand love, and love is obviously has a lot of baggage attached to it. Maybe you could just really quickly explain why we use the phrase love and not something else. You know, it's a tough word for a lot of people, but is it love? I guess is the question. When I experience this and this, you know, like, are they the same in the brain? Is it love? I guess is the good question.
Right. I think that was a rock slide at one point. So we're back to the sort of 60 seconds of neuroscience, which is that the brain is very conservative. It utilizes systems that develop for one purpose for other purposes in the modern world. It doesn't recreate some new love for the iPhone system. It uses the existing love system. And so, as we said earlier, oxytocin is often seen as the molecule of love. Love is much more complicated. There's a bunch of other neurochemicals that are associated with oxytocin release that we'll avoid talking about for now, that not only make love pleasant feeling, but reinforce interacting with a loved one, like caring for a child, wanting to see the same spouse for years and years and years. So this brain system that motivates us to love human beings, or for that matter, dogs, or your car. Have you named your car? Brian, did you name your car?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Whoops. I think I lost my audio, but can you hear me?
I got you now, yes.
Oh, I was saying, no, I haven't named my car yet, but maybe I should. Maybe we'll develop a little bit stronger bond between us. After this, I will.
Many people, you know, name their cars. They would spend thousands of dollars to save their pet's life when they can just pick up a new puppy at the Humane Society, right? So, you know, the love system, the attachment connection system is very strong in human beings because we have these little parasites that are attached to us as adults for so many years. We call those parasites children, right? So, you know, they're not able to leave the house until they're at least 18, and then they're still calling you all the time with all kinds of questions. So we have to have a very strong attachment system. That means we attach to many, many things around us that move, that seem to have their own agency, like animals, like cars. So that's all utilizing the same system for the love I feel for my kids, okay, because the brain's conservative. So we began testing whether we could identify the love for a brand with this same release of oxytocin and activation of this larger brain system. So we did a little mini study actually with employees at InOcean a couple of months ago, in which we had them bring in their favorite product and a picture of their favorite person. Okay? So then we asked them, we hooked them up to these neurologic sensors, so we got data 1,000 times a second from their heart, from their vagus nerve, this nerve with all the oxytocin receptors, and their skin conductance. We measured attention and this emotional resonance. And we found for the 8 people we tested that, there's a nice picture of the setup for this. The 8 people we tested, we found that 6 of the 8, in fact, love the person more than the product. Now, that's based on the neurologic systems. Everyone said they love the person more than the product, because of course, you know what the study's about. You've agreed to come here. You've brought in a thing to show us and talk about. So it's not like going to say, yeah, you know, I love my iPhone 10% more than my wife. I mean, no one's going to say that, right? So we have the same problem. I know what the study's about. I know the correct answer to give. But we found that in actually 3 of the 8 people tested, we found a slightly higher love for product than for person. And the reason we found that was really interesting. So before I said 2, because one was virtually a tie, and this is a woman who brought in a necklace that her little daughter, her 5-year-old daughter, had made for her. Is that a product or is that really a person? I mean, she's really talking about her daughter because the necklace symbolizes that. So let's throw her out. So let's look at the other 2 individuals. So one of these was a guy who played college sports. And he talked about how much he loved playing football, all the times that he was on the field getting muddy with all these guys and traveling. It was great. And he had this wonderful football that was signed by some famous NFL players. I've forgotten the details now. And when he told us about that experience, he was so engaged because there was a story associated with it, right? So that's important. Then he brought in a picture of his little 3-year-old son. And his son was 3. He was great. He was cute. He played with them. But he didn't have those lifelong set of really engaging experiences with his little kid yet because he's only 3, right? What could he do? So the other person who also loved the product more than the person had the same thing. They had a very rich story about why this product had essentially saved their life, you know, had gotten them out of depression, had made their life worth living as if it were a person. So I think what we learned from that, Brian, is that 2 things. One is that the same pathway seemed to be associated in the brain with love for a person and love for a brand. So I think it's okay to call this brand love. And the second thing is that when we love a product more than a person, it's not the product, it's what the product allows that person to do. And that in particular means life experiences, social experiences, changing the way you feel, you behave, allowing your life to be much richer. So if I reverse engineer that process, how do I build a wonderful narrative around a product? I've got to tell a story about how that product improves your life. Right? If I can tell that story in an engaging way that keeps your attention, is emotionally compelling, then I'm likely to have this bleeder effect in which the love for those things in my life that make life valuable, people, experiences, travel, whatever it is, are going to be enabled by this product. And my very lazy, maladapted to the common environment brain will go, therefore, I love this thing. I might even give it a name.
So I think I'm supposed to say we're opening up to questions here at the bottom now. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but...
Oh, let's do that. I would love to have some questions, and I'd love to hear someone say, bullocks. I do not buy this at all. How do you know this?
Yeah.
So I should say that we have many scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals that have identified these mechanisms. So this has been vetted. And the work we've done with the U.S. military has been absolutely compelling is it's actually about saving soldiers' lives, helping them weave narratives that reduce conflict so that we can use words rather than bullets to affect the goals we want to reach. Mm-hmm. So if you can't, my lab knows, if you can't wake up in the morning and be excited about saving people's lives, then I don't want you at work. Just go home.
At home, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think our chat...
Okay. Brian, maybe you could tell us how InOcean sees this confluence of art and science developing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do you see it going for the field?
Right, absolutely. So I think we're so used to assuming that consumers know what's best, that they consciously know what they want. And the simple fact that people don't always know what they like is kind of difficult to comprehend. It causes us to kind of think about the future of advertising and marketing and storytelling a little bit differently now. Because brand love happens unconsciously, and it requires a shift in how we tell these stories and what we tell and the narrative arc. And at InOcean, we're kind of looking ways to use all this data. And with the latest in neuroscience and marketing, we have the opportunity, I think, to understand the unconscious mind, to tell better stories, to unlock these connections between brands and people in ways that we never had before, because our unconscious emotions and motivate.
Right, but I'm worried that everything we've said, the folks listening will go, I knew that already. I knew it was unconscious. I knew it had to be emotional. I knew I had to sustain attention. What's really new here? So I want to critique our own conversation.
Yeah, I think that's to be determined. I think unquestionably we can use you can use this data that we've gathered or bio data in general to inform more relevant stories for people. Like with Xbox, Kinect, and other devices that can gather data. At the very least, we could tailor better communication. If I come home from work and my heart rate is elevated and I'm feeling stressed, or maybe it gives me some sort of calming herbal tea. So like gathering this data about what's happening in our bodies to deliver more accurate or more relevant stories, not accurate, more pertinent to where our physiological state is an exciting area, I think, for us to explore. I don't know the answer to your question. I guess the easy way or the easy answer is to just gather more data and keep testing. But maybe you have an answer better.
I think my answer is we've relied so much on intuition, and now we have a way to test that intuition before we launch a whole marketing campaign. It's not difficult now to actually run these kinds of studies, and do this kind of very subtle variations, vary the colors, vary the language, vary the gender of the person in the ad, and actually just sort of systematically span the space of ways to tell the story and see how it reacts. That's the first. The second is what you basically said, which is doing a physiologic segmentation of the market. And so I may want to have particular key factors for women versus men, old versus young, north versus south. And so think about kind of customizing those ads for particular markets based on how their brains respond. So I think that's key. Hey, we have a couple of questions. I'll take the first one, and maybe you can take the second one. The first one was why my lab at Claremont Graduate University started looking at this issue at all. The first was we were wondering, we spent a lot of time studying why people engage in pro-social or altruistic behaviors. So I wish I had I just had a book that I wrote, called The Moral Molecule, about why people would ever engage in moral behaviors when no one's watching. And so we study things like trust and generosity and charity. Why do people do this? What motivates them? We found this key role for oxytocin, this emotional resonator, this chemical of empathy. And that led to clinical trials for things like autism and schizophrenia. It led to many applications. And one of those applications was looking at public service ads. So another way to study charity was would you donate after you watch an ad to a charity? And we've done a number of studies looking at not just what you say you like, I like this phone, but actually what you do. So actually, could we use these neurologic measures to predict donations to a charity? And so in a series of studies, we've actually shown that the neurologic predictors are better than any other predictors we found. Personality, gender, how much you say you like ads. They predict very strongly and accurately if you're going to donate to a charity. And so once we got to that point, the logical question was, well, how far can we push this? Can we take it from liking an ad for a charity and donating money to it to purchasing a product? And when we started thinking about this and looking at products, Brian and I ended up on a boat off the harbor of New York together on the way to a conference, and he had reached out to me on the phone some months before and recognized me, and then we, over the course of the next 24 hours, hatched a couple of studies that we did within Ocean that we just discussed here to try to see how far we can push this from love for a person to love for a cause to love for a brand. And so that's where we are now. And as Brian said, we're in the very beginning of this. This is not, this is an exploration, and we're not sure how far it goes, but we want to see how far we can push this so that we can understand why we really do love brands. Like, I'm an Apple guy. I love Apple. It would take a lot for me not to, use an iPhone and a Mac and all that. I mean, I'm kind of in. I don't know why, but I want to be an Apple person. Okay? I call that love. My wife, not to her. I'm not really sure why. I'm going to keep her around. I don't know why.
Yeah.
You want to take the second question, Brian? It's a good one.
Sure. I can't see it. You see us another question there, Paul?
I do. It says, what is your favorite brand? Do you think that creativity and engagement can be explained using neuroscience?
Oof, my favorite brand. Oh, that's tough. The easy answer is Apple with the following they have, but can it be explained with neuroscience? I think to some degree, maybe, is kind of what Paul and I are trying to figure out. I would hope so, because we are our brains. You have a better answer, Paul, than I do.
Engagement, yes. I think we have a really good handle on engagement now. I mean, it's taken years and years and years of studies to really get this handle, but I think now we have a quite a good sense of engagement. Creativity is harder. What we have been doing in my lab is looking at the kinds of social environments that promote or inhibit creativity. And we have found that organizations with high degrees of trust between individuals, high degrees of autonomy, and lots of feedback from your colleagues tend to be the best for creativity. So we've developed a number of measurement tools to identify organizations that produce high levels of creativity. So it really comes to trust and building those social relationships. Right. So I'm not going to be, if my creative design, my innovation may blow up, if I'm going to get fired for doing that, even implicitly, I'm going to inhibit my creativity. So anyway, we're working on that. I don't think we've got the creativity part cracked, but we've got a part of it.
Yeah, we'd certainly like to know. So I'm being told that Uwe will be speaking at the ADMA Global Forum. And Paul, is your book moralmolecule.com, or is it where would you recommend people go to check that out?
Yeah, moralmolecule.com, lots of free stuff there, and the book's been out a year, so it's basically free on Amazon, and it'll give you the background on what this engagement system looks like in the brain, what promotes it, what inhibits it, why it's different in men and women, what happens when you pet your dog, and all those kinds of things in a fun story. From my laboratory in Southern California to the rainforest of Papua New Guinea, where I took blood samples from indigenous people living in the rainforest. I'm covered with mud. It's just crazy. Brian's read the book.
Yeah, I've read it a few times. I have the audiobook too.
Yeah, and audiobook you can hear my terrible voice.
Paul's voice. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's about it. I think thanks, Paul, for taking the time to sit down with us. And I should say Uwe is the VP of Engagement Strategy here at Ocean and will be speaking there at the conference. So his name is spelled U-W-E, which is the least phonetic. But anyway, thanks, Paul, and that's about it. We went over our time, so I guess we got to say goodbye.
That's a wrap. Hey, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Brian. Take care.